All right, welcome to another episode of the Tiger Mining Report here at TigersMLReport.com. I'm Rogelio Castillo. Alongside me is Chris Brown, and you can find us on Apple Podcast or wherever you listen to. Now we're part of the Believe Network, which is a podcast network with over 500 podcasts, ranging from pop culture to Solomon Wilcox, former receiver. They go everywhere. So our guest today is Jason Beck of MLB.com, and I spent a lot of time working with Jason this year as we both Jason and I had the dual screen thing going on in the press box where we were watching the minor leagues, and so we wanted to get Jason's take on the season, some of the hitters in the system, and then we did get some questions from the audience too in regards to some of the prospect development. And first and foremost, Jason, how you doing?
Good. It's while some people called it an iPad that I had in the press box, it was more a second screen for me to watch the minor league games while the season was going on. So it definitely it kept my attention for a good while, or a good portion of the summer.
Yeah, and Jason, we appreciate you joining us on a kind of unexpectedly eventful day here in Tigers land with the Tigers just signing up a new TV announcer. Um, I don't know if you guys want to discuss the Benetti thing at all, or if we want to stick with the minor leagues.
Sure.
But I will say, when they first announced that Matt Shepard was not going to be coming back, I was hopeful that our mutual friend Greg Gagne would get a shot, or Dan Hasty too. The Tigers, it would be cool to give these guys a shot, and hopefully they got some consideration. But it's hard to complain about getting Jason Benetti, who is arguably one of the top three announcers in all of baseball. So, and you guys just got a chance to listen to him. So I was wondering what your thoughts were.
And you know what? He is as well spoken on Zoom calls as he is on broadcasts. He's very thoughtful. You could tell that he really wanted to, not just give good quotes, but give good insights to try to explain why he made this jump and leaving his hometown team and coming to Detroit. And, there was buzz after the season that the Tigers were trying to swing for the fences with the hire. And that's not all that unusual. I think a lot of teams will like to try to get big names. But they were serious about it and they kept it up. And, to get Jason Benetti from within the division, I think is, that's a huge move. And I think, they even Jason talked about it, they want to put on a good broadcast and they want to, really kind of showcase not just this team, but, the ballpark and the city and everything. And, it seemed like their plans for the telecast resonated with it. And I think what struck me was that a lot of this was coming from the Tigers. This was very much a Tigers operation to bring in a guy like Jason Benetti. And, it's interesting they took such a vested interest in the broadcast. And you wonder if it's going to be an increasing trend. And I know, there's a fair number of broadcasters around the league who are hired by the team, but you wonder if it's going to be an even more increasing trend as we wait for the situation with the RSNs to shake out. And we've seen some teams that have gone internally or gone through MLB with their broadcasts in midseason this past season.
Yeah, and I think the biggest takeaway I took from Jason too was the fact that a lot of fans are going to be able to relate to him because he was talking about White Sox Twitter being a thing and Tigers Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it, is a thing, and saying he has friends that are forever a lifetime, and some of it was really sincere, all of it was sincere. Don't get me wrong. What I was just saying is, it's refreshing to hear something like that because for people who watch the game differently now, where you're watching the game with social media in the background. We all do it, either for our job or just part of what we do now. The fact that he embraces that newer technology, I think also says something about the Tigers being more aware of the ever-changing landscape of how we consume media. So I think that was a big takeaway I took from that I think that he is going to be relatively adaptable to anything that happens, especially because when you hear him on with Steve Stone, the way he plays off with Steve Sloan, it was night and day compared to the Hawk. I mean, no offense to the Hawk or anything, but I definitely think that this is you have now him and Dan Dickerson, and probably one of the best 1-2 combos in all of baseball, maybe even all of professional sports. I mean, that's a combo, that's depth. I mean, that's like just beyond like, wow, you got Dickerson doing TV team now too. So that's huge.
Yeah, and like it's a big deal when Dan does TV because he is very much a radio guy. He loves that medium. He loves the way you describe, you paint the picture on a radio broadcast for him to be willing to do this. And I know he did he did a few games a few years ago, but for him to be willing to do this says a lot about what he thinks of Jason. And I think a lot about what he thinks about what the Tigers are trying to do.
Yeah, and it's just and it continues to add depth, and hopefully maybe Greg Gagne will get some time in the radio side of things.
Yeah, if there's going to be 30 games of Dickerson on TV, then there's room for our minor league friends to come up and work some more magic there at the radio press box.
Same for Hastings.
Yeah, and then that's one of the strengths of this organization is that there's really good broadcasters in the system, and I think Greg's right there, and I think Greg's been ready for his opportunity for a while, and hopefully he gets that shot to do some of the radio games when Dan hops over the TV.
Yeah, and so I know I immediately veered us off course here, but I'll see if I can steer us back on, because one of the things Benetti I saw from the his comments was he talked a lot about the future, where he sees this organization going, and a lot of that has to do with what's been happening in the minors the last couple of years, and we talked just before this that the last 3 years in Tigers minor league system has produced an awful lot of more power, at least in better hitters than about the decade before combined. So yeah, I mean, we can get back into the minors now. I don't know what we were going to discuss immediately with that, but Rajat, what was your first question going to be?
Oh, my first question is really your overview of how the season played out for. I think fans were wondering about guys like Cole Keefe or Justin Merlin not getting the call up, and I think the Tigers handled it fine because I think they were evaluating what they have right now. But overall, Jason, the way the season ended for Erie, obviously winning the championship was huge, but Lakeland also showed some signs of life. They made the playoffs. I think that's not talked about often enough. And even to a certain extent, I mean, West Michigan was in there to the last minute to get a postseason berth. So that, to me, spoke volumes of development. But what are your thoughts overall?
I think team-wise, this was the deepest this organization has been in terms of team success since I started here in 2002. So, and that says a lot. You saw, not just Erie winning the title, but like you said, these other affiliates, Toledo was playing much better ball over the second half of the season. It didn't hurt, obviously, that Colt Keith and Justice Bigby got promoted. Lakeland was terrible for most of the first half and then really turned it around, with no small help from some of the draft picks from this summer. And West Michigan really looked like a much improved team from the start of the season to the end. And I think that's a tribute to, the players that, putting in the work, but also the staff that the Tigers have assembled at these stops who are working with these guys and not giving up on guys for slow starts or, for glaring holes, and, just putting in the work to make these guys better. And what we see, I think, is, this is a deep organization. I think overall, but usually when we talk about the depth in this system, it's talked about in terms of pitchers. But I think hitting wise, you're starting to see that starting to track now as well, to where, Keith and Malloy get the headlines, but to basically repeat the success you had with the 19th round pick in Gary Carpenter, and then have another 19th round pick emerge in Justice Bigby, that just doesn't happen in a lot of places. And certainly in this system, you rarely had third day picks emerge, and here he was, Justice Bigby putting, not just putting on a show, but looking like a really bona fide future major league hitter.
And we saw, you mentioned the hitters for sure, but there was continued development with the pitchers. We've talked a lot about the strides that Sawyer Gipson-Long made over the course of the season. And you see Reese Olson developing at the big league level, but even somebody like Blake Holub, who was a 14th, 13th round pick, two-way 15th even. I don't remember exactly, but two-way player, didn't do a whole lot in his debut full season last year. He looked impressive, but I should say 2 seasons ago, I suppose. But they turn him into a viable late inning reliever, and they go out and they land a big league outfielder who's got a 125 WRC plus since 2019. So 25% better than average. I mean, certainly there's some money and age things in there, but they turn this 15th round pick into a legit big leaguer. And so I think that's just another of the signs that we've seen of the improved development in the organization. And one of the reasons I think you can be optimistic about the future.
Yeah, I mean, for years, this was an organization to where, like, if they wanted to trade for players of value, to trade prospects for players of value, it almost always involved trading, higher ranked prospects. And to get the production out of a guy like Holub to catch the Brewers' eye says a lot. And I think there's more guys where he came from. And that is going to be one of the more interesting things for me to follow this offseason, especially since, it's not a great free agent market, especially for the areas the Tigers are trying to address, but there are opportunities on trades. And, can they leverage what they've done, notably on the pitching side, in throwing a lot of money and resources into the pitching development to turn good good pitching prospects into really good pitching prospects? Will that translate into more buzz on the trade front? And is that going to be a way that the Tigers address some of the holes, at the major league level? I'm going to be fascinated to see this, because I do think, talking to scouts from other organizations, that, there's a higher regard for the depth in this organization than there's been in, the past several years.
Yeah, and that's where, I mean, you look at some of the Rule 5 decisions they have to make. Really, I mean, you talk about Dylan Dingler, Eliza Alfonso, and you saw you saw that Rodriguez, Papersky, and I'm trying to blank on the other catcher that were all going to be minor league free agents. They have some tough decisions to make with that. And obviously Montero was on the list, but he got added the 40-man. And that's another pitcher too, who took to development, who climbed 3 levels, led the minor leagues in strikeouts. And I don't think to me at least, he's not talked about often enough, because the fact that he went from West Michigan, it was kind of a question mark. I mean, towards the last part of the season last year, he had a really good, strong finish. But then they come in, and then when I talked to him about him changing his grip, again, taking the instruction from the Tigers, and this was even the case with guys like in the ability for the Tigers to see somebody, what they saw in Lyle Lockhart, for example. The fact that they saw something, they look beyond his numbers, because his numbers at AA with the Dodgers were not good. But hey, they're like, here, I want you to start throwing a splitter. And he became he was a big, I think the pickup, the evaluation of looking at talent like that, also Eddie Leonard also comes to mind too. That is a big, big improvement, where you're picking up guys from the scrap pile, for lack of a better word, that may not look good statistically, but they're able to take something out of them.
Yeah, we talked about this with Reese Olson earlier. Like, he was basically not a throwaway prospect, but he was not a highly ranked prospect when the Tigers got him for Daniel Norris. And then he comes into the system and shows some signs. And then you see him kind of struggle, for a stretch there in 2022 in Erie. Battles some issues in spring training, starts here at Toledo, has some real struggles, and then things click for him. And I think what he's been able to do in terms of the slider and the curveball is just, it's amazing to watch him put those to work when they weren't nearly as big of pitches for him when he came into the organization. And I think that speaks a lot about what, the work that he put in, but also the work that the Tigers personnel and their pitching people put in to make him better. And there's examples up and down the organization. Jackson Jobe looked like a different pitcher when he came back from the back injury at a time where we wondered, is he going to be healthy enough to be an impact prospect? We didn't know. And he not only comes back healthy, but he comes back looking like a different guy because he spent that time down in Lakeland working on pitch design. Montero with the wipeout breaking ball says, he was barely on the radar, going into the year. And now he's somebody where you talk about him. It's when he gets to the big leagues, not if. Sawyer Gibson Long with the cutter and the change, there's so many guys who've come through here who have, taken advantage of opportunities and guys who, weren't necessarily looked at as big time prospects. And then just one little change here and there, one little design on the pitch, and all of a sudden you've got a major league caliber pitcher.
Yeah, I mean, it's the Tigers. They're not quite the Tampa Bay Rays yet, but it's nice to see that they can go and get guys from other organizations and maximize them. You guys, you mentioned the four big ones from the last year or two, and Olsen, Gibson, Long, and Eddie's Leonard, who probably doesn't get talked about enough either, and Lyle Lockhart. And so it's fascinating to see who might they, Justin Malloy, even you could say was maximized to a certain extent. So who might they go get this year, or is Brady Allen take a big step next year? I know that Scott Harris seems to like him. So yeah, it's a fun time to be following this sort of stuff. And meanwhile, things are getting fun at the big league level too. So it's a good time to be a Tigers fan in general, I think.
Yeah, it's a good time. It's been a really good year to show how the minor leagues and the major leagues go hand in hand in terms of especially these days, and given what the Tigers are trying to do, it's a partnership, and we've seen some synergy there that I think wasn't there during some stretches. Notably, especially during the latter days of the Dave Dombrowski era, where a lot of times you would see prospects coming in and they were basically, trade pieces. Jonathan Crawford and Willie Adames, guys like that. And then, now we're, these guys have a future in Detroit now. The guys that they draft, even in the, second and third days, you see a pathway to where, if you make changes, your opportunity is here. You don't have to get traded somewhere else to find opportunity, because the Tigers feel like that they can do stuff to not only help you in the minor leagues, but to affect your major league future.
And the biggest thing too, Jason, that I know it sounds like a small thing, and I think we talked about this during the season, was changing the mental aspect, but nutrition. I mean, the press conference that we went to for West Michigan, and for Isaac Pacheco and Jace Young to go on about the nutrition, doesn't sound like a lot, but then you hear that now they're breaking ground on a new center in the Dominican Republic, and they're adding on the Lakeland. How important, to us, I know how important it is, but those things go a long way, especially if you're trying to set a tone for future prospects to come here.
I think it goes I think it's huge for the, and in some areas they're playing catch up with other organizations, to be honest. There were some areas where I think that got overlooked, that there was a very traditional way of doing things. And it's not the Tigers' fault. It's something that all organizations did for years. And it was just, when were the Tigers going to, start to make that transition themselves? And they've made it quickly now to where it's they've gone from playing catch up to, really kind of setting their own path now, to where it's okay, this isn't just what worked for other organizations. Here's what we can take out of that and make this, and this work for us. And I'll be fascinated to see how that translates going forward. We've talked, there's been talk about Dominican Academy for years, and it kind of hasn't gone far. And now to hear the Tigers talking about it, it's like a concrete thing is huge. To take the beautiful campus in Lakeland and get more out of it, I think is vital, because it's a huge strength what the Tigers have there. In some ways, it was kind of it was a diamond in the rough, because so many organizations, for their facilities in Florida or Arizona, they're sharing it with somebody else. The Tigers have this all to themselves, and they can do what they want, and they have a city that's willing to work with them and bend over backwards to accommodate their vision for the complex. And it's a great opportunity to build something that, that you can put right up there with, any other organization in the majors, hopefully by the time it's all done.
So we did get some questions from people on Twitter, and the first question comes from Nick Spillane, and he says, if the Tigers were to use either of these players in a potential trade this offseason, who would you rather go with, or rather go, Justin Henry Malloy or Justice Bigby?
In terms of who would you rather trade, or who would you rather keep?
I think, who would I rather trade?
Okay. Malloy has a built-in advantage of being able to play infield and outfield. I think that's huge on his part, although it sounds like the Tigers are steering him more towards playing outfield more than third base now. And obviously Malloy's eye is, eye at the plate and knowledge of the strike zone is really good. I'm curious how, what we'll see in terms of Bigby, because he's opened some eyes in the Arizona Fall League. And I think we've seen him, show power in hitting and do more than just go to the opposite field, which was, kind of made some waves early in the year as he was rising from West Michigan to Erie to Toledo. He's put on a good show in Arizona, and I don't think that gets overlooked. But he can also, play pretty good defense in the corners there. And I think he's got that work ethic to where he tracks, he's on that Carpenter type track in terms of wanting to, not resting on his laurels and wanting to improve and wanting to get everything out of his game. So there's a curiosity in me to see where that goes from here and what we see out of Bigby when we show up in Lakeland next spring.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that I saw, especially in Erie, is that he would have 6 or 7 games where he hit constantly, and then he would have a game off or two where he went 0 for 4, 0 for 5, and then he just came right back, and it was consistent throughout the season. And you could tell Erie's offense struggled a little bit when he got to win Toledo, and so they were focused more on using their defense, and Alvarez had to change his strategy on the fly for that. But overall, it worked out for Erie. But still, he was really I hate to say this term, but the straw that stirred the drink for Erie in the second half of the season after Colt Keith left.
And Toledo got better after he arrived. I don't think that's a coincidence. It's not just Colt and Malloy. Like, Bigby meant a lot up there. So, and it's, we'll see what he looks like next spring. But, I got to think that, assuming he's not traded, that we're talking about him in as a piece in Detroit somewhere along the lines, especially given, they usually have injuries in their outfield. But even aside from that, I think they're, AJ and Scott are going to want to see what they have in this guy and want to see what he can do in a ballpark like Comerica. We've seen a lot of good hitters slash that gap, right-handed hitters especially, slash that gap in right center and be able to do a lot of damage there. And I think Bigby's got that opportunity.
Definitely. So Steve Floridian wants to know, who is one realistic free agent you want to see or see the Tigers signing?
Well, we got news the other, I guess yesterday from, Scott Harris at the GM meetings that, they're primarily focused on pitching right now. So, and especially after, it looks like Eduardo Rodriguez is probably not coming back. We'll see. Things can change. But right now, you at least have to plan for the idea that you're going to have to fill a hole in that rotation. I'm going to be fascinated to see, like, Scott's track record is, and we've talked about this, that, he doesn't tend to go after the big name free agents on the pitching side so much as he looks for undervalued guys and rebound candidates and brings them in with a chance to, kind of regain their value for the open market. And I think when you look at the free agent market pitching wise, there are guys who have the chance to fall through the cracks and, be potential, buy low opportunities on pillow contracts. Maybe it's Jack Flaherty, who didn't have the impact in Baltimore that I think anybody figured down the stretch. Maybe it's a Lucas Giolito, who, while he looked good a couple times down the stretch, was otherwise like utterly hittable and almost unrecognizable. Maybe it's a Seth Lugo, who is kind of always been underrated, but has that opportunity to take the next step in his career, albeit at a later stage. So, it's going to be that type of signing that I'm going to be looking for, because I think given the depth of pitching on the markets, I think there's an opportunity to find a guy or two there who, for lack of a better term, fall through the cracks and are going to be looking for an opportunity to recoup their value. And do those guys look at what the Tigers have done in terms of pitching instruction and see a chance to make themselves better, kind of along the lines of what Michael Lorenzen did?
A guy who I think that would fit that mold is the gentleman who led the KBO in wins and I believe also strikeouts in Eric Fettel. Is it Eric Fettel?
Oh, Fetty, I think, right?
Eric Fetty. Yeah, Eric Fetty is a prime example of that, because a lot of the big names are going to probably go off the market. And I think he being 30 years old, I really think he would fit with the Tigers pretty well as a guy that he fits that what you're talking about with Scott Harris. Undervalued. He might, again, some teams might be interested in him. And I do like the Rodriguez, the Cuban, who was part of the World Baseball Classic. That's another guy I really like a lot, but I think he might be, the Pirates have been rumored to as well. But those kind of guys that are getting attention elsewhere, and I know that Tiger fans want to hear the big Japanese pitchers like Yamamoto, but I just don't see that happening.
Right. And it's, to be able to talk about the Tigers with international free agents, just by itself is a big step. This is something that it's kind of been an untapped commodity for the Tigers here for years. Eric Fetty, I think it's a very interesting name. Scott Boras, I believe, brought it up at the GM meetings and said they've gotten calls from just about every club on guys like that, because it's just, he's, like you said, he's kind of one of those guys who has a chance to go undervalued and isn't a big name, but did things that, overseas that were interesting. And I think in this day and age, with StatCast and with the advanced metrics, it's so much easier to measure a guy like that than it was when, say, Miles Michaelis came over, a few years ago. So, more teams can kind of take a serious look at that. And, I know the Cardinals have been opportunistic on that front between Michaelis and Drew Verhagen a couple of years ago. But, I think I'll be interested to see how a guy like that potentially fits in. Because I think that would be a fascinating way for the Tigers to fill a hole on the pitching side.
Chris, what about you?
Well, yeah, I've played out, like, I've already started playing out their lineup in my head for 2024, and like the big holes that you see there are probably second base or third base, and it'd be awesome if you could fill in Cole Keith and Justin Henry Malloy there. That'd be great. And honestly, I don't know if, like, the two big options on the free agent market are Matt Chapman and Jeimer Candelario at third base. And Chapman would be, a great defensive upgrade, but I don't know if either of those guys actually, really move the needle as much as like a fully weaponized Keith or Malloy would if things work out there. So I tend to look at the pitching as well, and I've sort of been just focusing on the bullpen, um, which the Tigers, was a great bullpen last year, but you go where the talent is, I suppose. And I do wonder if they want to add another lefty reliever because it's just Tyler Holton now. They DFA'd Tyler Alexander and Vasquez, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Both
but
got lopped off the roster.
I wouldn't hate it if they went out and signed Jordan Hicks. Like he might be the top reliever, top right-handed reliever on the market. I don't think they're going to go after Hader or Chapman, but Hicks, that's a guy I think who has more upside. He's still just 27, doesn't turn 28 until September, and I don't think he's going to cost a ton because he's not like a proven lights out lockdown closer. But boy, I'd love to see a guy who sits at 100 work with Chris Fetter and Juan Nieves and Robin Lund and see what they can do to maximize him there. And if things don't work out with the Tigers as a team, teams at the trade deadline are always looking for hard throwing relievers. So like, I mean, I think he's a guy who could make your team better and could also, as a solid backup, like a fallback option if you have to trade him at some point. So I'd like to see them go sign him, but I do imagine that there'll be a fair amount of suitors there.
Yeah, you know what? The interesting thing to me is if they decide how to decide also for backup shortstop purposes, because the Tigers, if there's one thing that seems to be screaming out to me at least, is if you're going to make Ryan Kreidler great, but Ryan Kreidler has been shown that he's got an injury history. They don't have really a lot of depth at short right now, and Leonard has been playing the outfield more or less, and so I think they were gearing him towards that. So that's another thing that I'm interested to see where they will get some value out of. And with Baez, again, you're hoping he can bounce back, but they really don't have an option right now long term. Short term, but that speaks to the next question, which is, this comes from Deadly Ninja Bees. How do we feel about Max Clark and Kevin McGonigal's future prospects after their first minor league season?
I mean, it seems pretty good to me. They certainly held their, more than held their own in the complex league. I almost called it the Gulf Coast League there for a second. I had to catch myself. And then, they went up to Lakeland, for full season ball, kind of surprisingly, and, did okay down the stretch. They weren't necessarily as overwhelmed as you might expect teenagers to be, especially in their draft year. So, I'm curious about, how that goes from here. Could they move quickly? Do you want to stick with a deliberate path and timetable for these guys? Or could we see a Max Clark and McGonigal in West Michigan at some point next summer? Could we see them up north? And, if you do, like, what type of hitters do they look like when they get to these bigger ballparks? The situation with Corbin Carroll, kind of, watching him in this postseason, kind of reminded me of, it struck me as what the Tigers would love to be able to do with a guy like Max Clark. I don't know, and I'd kind of be surprised if he got there quite as quickly as Corbin Carroll did in Arizona. But, in terms of talent, you can kind of see where similar style of players, he could have that type of impact if things go well and the Tigers hit on this.
It's always tough to tell when you've got a couple high schoolers coming into pro ball for the first time at the end of the summer, and the sample sizes aren't huge. But as far as I'm concerned, it's you hold steady with Max Clark. Like, this is a kid who was considered a top 5 talent in the draft for a reason, and I still think he is. His debut was, he was great in the complex league. He struggled a little bit in the small sample in the Florida State League, but he was still walking a ton. I think he's just got to refine his approach a little bit. And I think that the arrow's up a little bit on Kevin McGonigal. Again, it's a small sample. You don't want to make too big of a deal of it, but the book on him was that he hits, and he came into pro ball and he hit. He hit 315. He had 18 walks to 10 strikeouts. I think he's he has the look of a guy who's going to be an absolute nightmare for pitchers. Just a huge pain. He's going to walk and he's going to hit, and so yeah, that's pretty exciting. I do think that just based on the last couple of years, we probably will see those guys in West Michigan by the end of the year if they produce the sort of way that they're capable of.
Yeah, especially McGonigal. I mean, some of the talent he was taking on in Clearwater was against major league pitchers who were doing rehab starts. Let's not forget that during the playoffs. I mean, Clearwater had an advantage there. They had two, I think it was one starter or reliever that was on rehab. And so that definitely helped Clearwater. And the fact that Kevin did a pretty good job of handling it, that's a good thing, sign of things to come. And the last question, speaking of Lakeland, comes from that guy, or that's him on Twitter, that guy. Do you think Jose Briseño has a chance to stay behind the plate long term, or are we looking at a future first baseman?
I honestly have not seen nearly enough of him to be able to make a judgment on that. I know the Tigers think highly of him, and I think they want to give him every opportunity to try to make it work behind the plate. He's somebody I suspect we'll see on the MLB pipeline prospect rankings for the Tiger system when they get updated over the winter. But yeah, it's a hard one for me to answer in specifics because I just have not seen enough of them.
I know that Baseball America just recently talked about his, what was it, Chris? He had a really good hard hit contact rate, right? Something to that effect.
Yeah, it was they were doing a combination of aid and hard hit rate and swing and miss rate and all the stuff, all the indicators that you like from a hitter, like everything that shows that there's a promising bat there. We did talk to Jeff Ponce from Baseball America, and he got down there to see him and talk to some scouts, and he wasn't overly impressed with him. I think it's kind of an odd setup at the plate, and he's a big hulking guy, and it looks more like power over bat speed. But all the underlying indicators are there. But he was also definitely not very impressed with Briseño as a catcher. I think, generally speaking, if you're 18, 19 years old and you're already 6'4" and like 225 pounds, the odds of you staying behind the plate are slim. I wouldn't, I'm not going to completely rule it out, but I do think that he's probably a first baseman, a DH type down the road, just because of, we've got decades of watching kids grow from the age of 18 to 24 or 25, and a lot of guys don't get smaller. I'll say that.
I know that Garco was like, he's going to be a catcher. Well, I mean, Garco was pretty upbeat about him staying a catcher, but yeah. What's up?
I wouldn't put it past them to continue developing him like that. I'm a little bit skeptical that it'll work.
Yeah, as a receiver, I think he has an arm, but I think as a receiver, that's where he struggles a little bit. And from what little I saw of it, but overall, there is some signs that he could be useful, and that's something where again, on the international side of things, to really wrap it up, the biggest takeaway that I got this season is Montero has a chance to be the first big league starter the Tigers have developed internationally since Felipe Lira. Jason, does that sound right?
Jurgens?
Jurgens,
yeah. Technically, I meant like from the Latin American side of things.
Oh, okay.
Felipe Lira.
Yeah, man, it can't be Lira. I guess it could be Lira.
I mean, because you could talk about relievers, you could talk about Fernando Rodney. The relievers are there.
Soto.
Soto.
Yeah,
comes to mind too. But I can't think of a starter in the last decade or even longer than that I'm trying to think of. I just couldn't. His name was drawing a blank there. But that, to me, the international side is where I think that was something I'm looking forward to 2024. Is there progress with those international prospects? Can Campos go and hit for power? We know he can hit it for average a little bit, but now can he hit for power?
I am fascinated to see what Campos does. Now that he has a year at West Michigan under his belt. People forget we've been talking about him forever, but he's still young. He's still awfully young for a prospect, and he has time to develop and still figure some things out. And he strikes me as a guy who could make that leap, and then when it comes, it could come somewhat quickly.
What are you gonna say?
Yeah, I mean, there are not many people who in the system who hit the ball harder than Campos does, and we talked about it before. Is you can't get a fastball. I mean, you can't get a fastball by him, but he can hit any type of fastball. He was a Jacob Misiorowski, the kind of the star of the futures game this year for the Brewers. He was no hitting West Michigan in a game, and then Campos took one of his 100-mile-an-hour fastballs and just lined it right over the third baseman. He's got a lot of talent with the bat. It's more about finding that approach to lay off pitches that he can't hit as hard as he's capable of, and getting better in the outfield and on the bases and all that stuff. But like you said, Jason, he's 20. Like this is there's plenty of time for him.
Yeah, and his fielding has to improve too. There's got to be some improvement there. That's yeah. So, but Jason, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. We really appreciate it. Where can people find? Of course, people can find you on Twitter or X at Beck Jason. But what else you got going on this offseason? You're going to finally get some downtime a little bit.
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, it's been somewhat quiet. I did not go to GM meetings. I am going to the winter meetings. I'll be following. I've been following the fall league, watching the streaming webcasts on there, trying to follow Young and Big B and How You Lee, guys like that. So it's just kind of right now the plan is more of that. So and I'm on Twitter, Beck Jason, same handle on Threads. Jason Beck on Blue Sky. So I just joined that a week or two ago, I guess. So branching out a little bit.
Yeah, especially because for all we know, X or Twitter or whatever is going to go away next week. It seems like it's a constant state of chaos. But Jason, thanks again for your time. Really appreciate it. And look forward to be seeing you probably at spring training at some time soon.
Awesome. Looking forward to it.
Awesome.
Can feel that sunshine in Lakeland now.
Oh yeah, I mean it's nice. At least the sun's out here today in Michigan.
Sunny
So
today,
yeah.